Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us. Welcome to Pattern for Progress Housing Webinar Series. This is our fourth housing event. Our first and second focused on the residential real estate market, commercial real estate, specifically office space, and the impact of remote work. Our third discussed affordable housing and programs from the perspective of housing agencies and residents. These are all available to view on our YouTube channel, and there are links on the website as well. Today's topic will be focusing on multifamily housing development and resources. Our panelists today include developers, lenders, a commercial and residential appraiser, and a state representative from the Office of Homes and Community Renewal. Before I introduce each of the panelists, I want to take a moment to frame the discussion. We're now approaching about 90 days, maybe even close to 100 days since the shutdown. We certainly are living in a different world than we were in early March. 2 weeks ago, the state allowed the Hudson Valley to enter phase 1 of the reopening. Here we are 2 weeks later, and the Hudson Valley is now in phase 2 of this reopening. Hopefully, the Hudson Valley will continue on this trend, and the state will announce phase 3 and phase 4 for reopening over the next 4 weeks. Since early March, we've all been facing some very daunting realities. First, the shutdown itself, business comes to a screeching halt. Construction stops, except for developments with an affordable housing component. The real estate industry stops and then starts up in a virtual world. The state issues a moratorium on evictions for 3 months and then extends it for another 2 months. We see a dramatic increase in remote work. And there seems to be a demographic shift into the Hudson Valley from New York City. This is based on what we're hearing from realtors and appraisers, bankers, closing attorneys for real estate transactions, developers and property managers. People are leaving the city and renting or buying here in the Hudson Valley. We're also hearing that seasonal residents are looking to stay year-round, again impacted by the shift from the traditional workspace and business hours to remote work. The federal government passes the CARES Act to provide immediate assistance to residents and businesses, all in an effort to help those who have lost income and to try to build a bridge to carry the economy until it is turned back on. In turn, the state of New York creates programs to stimulate and bridge gaps in the economy. So multifamily developers and existing property owners in the Hudson Valley have been hit hard due to the shutdown in construction and the loss of rental income due to the moratorium on evictions. Clearly, there are many families that are witnessing economic hardships and the loss of income, and they're struggling. The eviction moratorium is designed as a way to keep people housed during these extraordinarily difficult circumstances. The moratorium was good for 3 months, and it was extended a few weeks back, and it is now for 5 months. But the rent will come due, which is another problem in the near term for families that are struggling. Simultaneously, many owners of small and even mid-sized residential and commercial buildings have had to carry the maintenance and operating expenses associated with their buildings with no rent or a reduced amount of rent. Over the last 100 days, the country has suffered a tremendous loss of life and is facing many social and equality issues. Although the healthcare system has been pushed to its limits, it has stayed strong through this crisis. Clearly too much to cover in an hour. So let's focus on one element, housing. I'm excited and very pleased to be joined by a panel of professionals involved with multifamily housing to put perspective on the market, the impacts on rents and property management, lending and finance, and talk about some new resources that can help our communities. We are joined today by Eric Baxter, Vice President of Baxter Built, Joe Bonura Jr., Principal of Bonura Hospitality Group, Greg Langer, President of Valuation Consultants, Tom McGrath, Senior Vice President of the Community Preservation Corporation, and Madeline Fletcher, New York Homes and Community Renewal Director for Distressed Asset Preservation. My role today is to facilitate this conversation and also play the role of timekeeper. We have about 10 minutes per person, so I'll stop talking soon, but I will take out the virtual hook if needed. Let's start with our developers, Eric Baxter and Joe Bonura. I would like each of you to respond to a few questions, starting with Eric. Eric, what have you been seeing as your largest and most challenging issues during the COVID-19 pandemic? And how has rent collection been in March and April versus May and now June? Lastly, is the eviction moratorium impacting any of your revenues? Eric, I'll turn the floor to you.
Yeah, well, I'll start with the biggest challenges, and that's obviously been how do we navigate being a good landlord and being good to our tenants while still collecting rents. You know, we're still running a business. We still need income and revenue to survive and pay the banks. So we really tried to talk to each individual tenant, look at each individual's circumstances, and try to work with each person individually. I think most tenants really do understand that the rent is due and that they do have to pay their rent. So we've been able to work with certain individuals who've been laid off or have had issues with their employment. Now, the rent collections in March and April, obviously the pandemic hit kind of mid-March, so most of March was collected. When April started, it really no one had an idea of what's going on. No one really knew the future. No one knew what was going to come of this. So a lot of people naturally held money tight to themselves. So after talking to each individual tenant, understanding the circumstances, the government did a good job stepping in with unemployment, the stimulus check. Over time through April and even into May, it was slow, but we got to it. Once June hit, I think everyone knew what was going on, and June has been very good for rent collections so far, so we're happy with that. As far as the evictions, obviously we're not evicting anyone during COVID, but the issue has been we had about 5 evictions proceeding prior to the pandemic hitting. And then once I think the day after they closed the courts, we had our evictions hearing. So those were another 3 months of waiting for that, and now another 2 months with August. So that is what it is. You know, every developer built in a 5% vacancy rate. So, you know, that just goes into that bucket.
Sure. And Eric, you also operate commercial buildings.
Correct.
And has the rent been an issue on retail space and service space?
We mainly have multifamily, and the few retail tenants have been able to pay or have been doing, you know, a grab and go scenario. And most of our commercial tenants are office or medical, so they've been able to keep open. So we've been very fortunate for that reason. The mill house, which I also own and operate as well, or better yet, help operate, we've been able to work with ourselves on what the best scenario is for both sides of the business. So been fortunate for that.
So overall, it's been good news then.
Yeah,
which is great to hear.
You know, when it first hit, everyone kind of was a little scared, calling each other. You know, what are you doing? You know, what's the best course of action? But after really working with each tenant and talking to everyone, we've been able to get through it. And you know, not to our surprise, but I think the tenants have been great about it and very understanding and been able to work with us.
That's terrific. Thank you very much. Joe, so in your properties, what have you been seeing, and what's going on in all of your units?
Sure. I think Eric said most of what I would say. Most of our units, our water club building in Poughkeepsie, a lot of our tenants are healthcare. So most of them have been fully employed. Many of the others are professionals and they've been employed. Much like Eric, we had some eviction proceedings that needed to take place prior to the pandemic, and this has been a windfall for those bad tenants, and that they are just continuing to hang out in the building, even though they knew that it was time to go maybe 6 months ago. You say that it's a windfall. It's not really a windfall for anyone. It's been a really tough situation. I think some of the challenges, just to talk about a couple different things, are how do we keep an elevator building safe for people, specifically when we have healthcare workers that are coming to and from hospital every day. So, sanitization costs, there's extra cleaning expenses that weren't budgeted for to try to keep the building safe on all the touch surfaces. But generally speaking, rent collection wasn't as bad as we thought it would be. I kind of feared that it would be worse, and it hasn't been. So that's a good thing. And that's on the residential side. Now, on the commercial side, we do operate a number of commercial buildings that have restaurants as tenants, and that's the complete opposite. Unfortunately, restaurants have been decimated. We've received nearly zero rent from our multiple restaurant tenants. They've had no revenue. They were coming out of winter, which is typically the slowest season in the Hudson Valley, and they've been really, really hard hit. So that's worse than expected, whereas the residential has been better than expected.
All right. Well, thank you. So, Eric, and back to you. So, thinking about market demand, couple questions in and around that topic. Who have you seen moving into apartments pre-COVID-19? And has there been a change in who's looking for apartments since the pandemic has started? And are there renters from New York City or lower Westchester County moving up into the Hudson Valley?
Yeah, being in Poughkeepsie, a lot of our units in the city of Poughkeepsie, being close to the hospital, you tend to get people actually coming from all over the country typically. But we have one large project that's 107 units that we're actually leasing up now, that we've most recently had a lot of inquiries coming from New York City, which is very exciting for the area. I think so. So, for what obviously everything going on in the world, they're excited to get out of New York City, have a little bit of space. So that mixed with the hospital residency programs kicking up into full swing. So a lot of the people are we have people from North Carolina, Florida, California that are getting set up to go to that program. So they've been all scrambling, looking for housing, and we've been getting a lot of calls from that as well.
Terrific. And Joe, from your perspective, same questions, pre and post pandemic?
Fortunately, our building's been pretty full. So we do have a lot of inquiries coming. And if we had vacant apartments, I think we could have filled dozens and dozens of them. But we were full. So our demographic is largely unchanged because we didn't have room to put them in. That being said, we have some for sale product that we're building up in Red Hook, and we have had a lot of inquiries for the Metro New York market. Not a ton of sales yet, but a lot of inquiries so far.
Yeah, and kind of piggybacking off of what Joe said, where we actually got hurt is our projects under development, and when they deemed construction non-essential anymore, we got pushed back close to 3 months on units we're supposed to be turning over to some of these tenants that either committed or were interested. So now we're scrambling, trying to get back in the swing of things, trying to get subs back on the jobs to get some of these units finished.
Sure, and that 3 month delay was, started right as construction season really started to kick back up, due to weather and such.
Yeah.
So, and one final question for both of you. The residents that have been looking, or existing tenants, what kind of amenities are they looking for? You mentioned, Joe, the elevator issue.
Yeah.
What's happening with that?
Sure. So amenities that they're looking for, a lot of people obviously working from home, but as we all know from the Zoom calls we've been on, sometimes it's a challenge to get a quiet space, especially in a 1 or 2 bedroom apartment. We've been able to make our conference room, which is in the building, available for those who want to work from home, just as reserved time. We've actually converted 2 other spaces into private type workspaces for people to have the ability to go do important phone calls outside of their apartment, but within their building. So that's a new amenity. The other amenities that they've been looking for are things I think that people have always wanted in apartment buildings, whether it be gyms, dog parks, terraces, pools, outdoor recreational spaces, all of those sort of things have been popular over the last several years. But what we're seeing new is this idea of I may be working from home permanently. And, my apartment wasn't designed with an office in mind. So where can I go make a really important call or take a Zoom without disrupting life in the apartment?
Good point. Eric, anything to add on amenity side?
We really have apartments kind of all over the city of Poughkeepsie, Beacon, Catskill. So we have a wider range of different types of units. In unit, everyone really wants, laundry in unit, dishwasher, microwave, the basics. But, and then like what Joe said, everyone wants a pool, everyone wants a gym. Unfortunately, we can't provide that for the units that are in downtown city of Poughkeepsie. But what we're looking to do on some of our new construction projects, like Joe said, is every floor on some of our elevator buildings, we're carving out space, we're calling co-work space that people can set up, take meetings, do work quietly, get out of the house per se, and do some work.
Terrific. Well, thank you both. We're gonna shift gears a little bit, we're looking. If you look beyond location, when we talk about real estate, location, that means everything. So let's turn our attention a little bit to 2 of the most important components beyond location of real estate, and that's value and demand, something an appraiser would have a lot to offer. And we just happen to have one of the region's best appraisers with us today, Greg Langer from Valuation Consultants. Greg has agreed to join us for a second time. Not sure why yet. We put him through the ringer the first time. But thank you very much, Greg. And so I have a couple of questions for you. Has there been an uptick on new interest in commercial and multifamily properties? And the second part of the question is, has there been enough time in this new economy to even address value? Has the rent collection issue impacted valuation? Greg?
So there is still a strong interest in the Hudson Valley region for multifamily apartments and warehouses, and we're still seeing some demand in those areas. In some of the deals that have happened or in the process of happening, a lot of the buyers are trying to utilize the COVID pandemic as a bargaining chip to maybe negotiate a lower sale price or lease terms. However, for the most part, the sellers are holding firm. They're not they're not biting, and we do not see a lot of instances of values being impacted significantly yet. There have been some fallout of some deals that people had agreed to buy properties, commercial properties, and they have backed out of leases or sales. So some of that has occurred. In terms of the rent collection thing is an issue. If you more seems in the smaller properties than the larger properties. If you have current vacancies, first of all, it's been hard to show your apartments, as Eric and Joe know, because you weren't allowed to do that very easily, and a lot of people were reluctant to move during these times. So, with the opening of phase 2 today, hopefully that changes. The rent collection issue, this whole eviction process now can take 5 months minimum. I mean, for the most part, as an appraiser, if I'm looking at somebody who isn't paying rent for the last 2 months, and they can go the next 3 months without paying rent, there's probably a strong possibility that that person is not going to be able to catch up 5 months worth of rent. That's just too big of a number for most people. So when we're appraising, we are making short-term adjustments to our values for those situations where that's an issue. I know in more of the higher end properties, it hasn't been so much of an issue because, like Eric and Joe said, people can work from home, or they're able to maintain enough of an income to pay their rent. But so we're having to make some adjustments. They're not big adjustments. If you would take, Eric talked about, a 5 month vacancy factor. Well, maybe now I'm using 8% or 10% on some of these properties because that's the market they're in. Because different markets have different challenges.
Sure. And so, we spoke a little bit about remote work. Eric's talking about carving out some space in some of the areas. And so clearly there's been an increase and a shift by companies to operate with less office space while simultaneously reducing the number of people in the office. They just have to do that for social distancing requirements. So with that said, have you seen an uptick in demand for commercial office space in the Hudson Valley?
We have not seen that yet. Maybe some single offices. Some of these office properties offer one room situations where you can rent a room, and not everybody can work from home. That's just sometimes that can be challenging depending on who's at home and how big your house is. You can't find a place to hide. So there has been a little more demand for the shared office space that we've seen. But in terms of somebody coming and saying, I want to take 3,000 square feet and move my company here or expand my company, we are not seeing any of that. Well, very little of it. I mean, okay. Not enough to change the market.
Okay. And, we're talking about multifamily today, but I'm just curious, sharing your thoughts about the residential market and value with single family homes. How has that impacted or been impacted by the pandemic?
Well, the market for single family homes was strong before this started. Mm-hmm. And we had seen numerous old subdivisions that were not built out all of a sudden pick up interest in a lot of new homes being built in them. So some of them have almost finished, although construction had to stop on a lot of these. But there's been real strong demand still for single family houses, and during this pandemic, because of various reasons, people have been reluctant to list their homes. So now there's a lot of homes closed in the last 2 months that were pre-pandemic sales, but there's not been enough product to come online to replace those, so that people have a really good selection for an opportunity to choose different houses. So we've seen, bidding wars now for good homes, even some homes that aren't so good. But there's strong demand. This whole thing that we have to remember in the Hudson Valley is that not everybody is coming to the Hudson Valley. I mean, they have a lot of other options. They got Connecticut, they have New Jersey, they Pennsylvania. They can go other places. They don't have to come here. So you want to try and keep things on a welcoming, friendly course of action here. And unfortunately, we're starting to see moratoriums in numerous towns through the area because people are worried that all of New York City is going to come here. I don't think that's going to happen. But but good, strong residential market.
Okay. Good. Well, thanks a lot. Your insight has always been valuable in these conversations, and appreciate that once again. So we'll turn our conversation a little bit over to some lending finance. So the Community Preservation Corporation has been in the multifamily lending business since the early 1970s. Tom's been with CPC since I think the late 1980s. And I've had the pleasure of working with Tom at CPC in the mid-90s and throughout the past 25 years on different projects and deals. CPC has played a critical role in financing hundreds of thousands of multifamily units across the state. And if you do not know who they are, I strongly encourage you to go to their website, learn more about them. I like to say CPC doesn't just make a loan on a building, they revitalize communities. They turn places around. So good morning, Tom. Welcome to the
Thank
forum.
You. It's great to be here.
Before we talk about the New York Forward Loan Program, I'd love to hear your thoughts on how has the lending and underwriting requirements changed? Is there a more conservative approach to vacancy loss, loan loss reserves, letters of credit? And has there been a change in underwriting deals with retail and or office space income?
Yeah, I think it's evolving, Joe. I think when COVID hit, we were as stunned as everyone. We just, I don't think anybody really had an idea of how this was going to affect the real estate market and what have you. So we did pause for a couple of weeks and get just to try to figure out where things were going, thinking ahead. We finance, as you point out, we finance a lot of the downtown revitalization projects, so a lot of mixed use. How's commercial going to get impacted? What's going to happen with the residential and what have you? At the same time, we're also, a lot of what we're doing is financing construction loans. And so we recognize that, we're probably not going to be looking for occupancy for 12, 18, 24 months down the road. So trying to project out where we were. At the same time, we absolutely were committed to making sure that we continued to provide liquidity into the neighborhoods that we're serving. So we paused for a couple of weeks, took a look at what we thought was happening, and in the meantime, started to get a deluge of requests for forbearance on existing loans. Mm-hmm. So we were sort of in this middle position where, there's a lot of our multifamily projects that are having difficulty paying. On the other hand, we still wanted to get the liquidity out the door. So, we work with developers like Eric to try to get projects with he and others closed. There were some mitigating things that we looked at. In one case, a letter of credit. I mean, the concern, of course, is we close a construction loan, we get to the permanent side. What happens on the retail? Will there be liquidity with the borrower or within the deal itself to actually pay off the construction loan? So we were looking for various ways to mitigate those early deals. and with Eric's help and other developers' help, we did get through those, and we continued to close our construction loans. From an underwriting standpoint, I think even just these few months later, we have a better understanding of where we are. The requests that we had for forbearance, it was amazing how many developers pulled them back. They actually had a lot more collections than they thought. They just sort of anticipated that they wouldn't have collections. So collections have been very strong, as our developers have pointed out. And while I'm not on the asset management side, I think it may only be about somewhere between 5 to 7% of our portfolio that are actually moving forward with forbearance. So we thought it might be 50%. So from that perspective, so that's given us a great comfort level. So I think, from an underwriting standpoint, we are definitely looking at the commercial, how strong it could be, its exact location, whether there's a potential for any pre-leasing, and a little bit more carefully at the developers that we're doing business with to make sure that they actually have the liquidity to get the project done. As you know, we're very often very highly leveraged lenders. But we've continued to lend, and I don't think that our underwriting has been all that crippling to the development world.
Well, thanks. And one last quick question. Overall, has the market and the interest in the Hudson Valley north of Westchester and Rockland changed up here, sort of in the hinterlands of the mid-Hudson Valley?
Well, as you know, pre-COVID, it was very strong. And since then, I still am amazed at the various requests that we're getting. There was an initial period where developers did back off, and for good reason. I mean, they couldn't build other than the affordable housing that we were financing that could go. So anybody that was to acquire a site wouldn't be able to start construction right away. But now that things are starting to open up again, we're seeing statewide, and I wouldn't just say the Hudson Valley because it goes all the way up the state. We're seeing strong interest in developers that are looking to move forward on development deals.
All right. Well, that's good for the Hudson Valley, and it's certainly good for the renters in the Hudson Valley because our inventory is low of quality housing.
Exactly.
So our last part of today's event is really focused on resources, and I know that Tom's going to cover the New York Forward Loan Program, and Madeline, who has been patiently waiting. She's a director of an amazing statewide program, which is actually working in conjunction with CPC, and that's called the Small Building Participation Loan Program. So what I'd like to do actually is start with the New York Forward Program. And so, Tom, this is a brand new initiative by the state. And so perhaps you could just share some early guidance and some basics on this program, maybe availability and funding limits, eligibility requirements, and other terms and conditions as this program starts to take off and evolve.
Sure. This is, as you point out, brand new. The lenders that are involved are just really getting signed up this week, so it's very timely. But it's a program led by New York State, the governor, Economic Development, the Empire State Development Corp, HCR. There are a number of other players that are involved in it. LISC is the fund manager. There are several different banks that are lending. They put together a pool of about $100 million that'll be available for COVID-related business loans to private business owners, not-for-profits, and then there's a landlord piece for small landlord owners. And it's totally related to entities that have not been able to access any other type of lending, whether through the SBA or the PPP or anything like that. These are small businesses. On the business side, they shouldn't have any more than, say, $3 million of revenue. And simply stated, they look at 3 months of income, average that out, and then size that over 3 months. This is a 3-month loan program. And so they'd be able to borrow their average 3 months times 3. It's a 5-year repayment. To for-profit developers, for-profit business owners, it's 3%. To not-for-profits, it's a 2% 5-year loan. The first year is interest only. Years 2 through 5 are amortizing. The landlord program that CPC is involved with, there are 5 CDFIs that are working together with this. CPC is the only one on the landlord side, and there are 4 on the business side. On the landlord program, it's geared up also to help for 3 months. So you essentially take a look at your pre-COVID rents and what your current COVID rents or COVID affected rents are today. And whatever that delta is, there's a loan available for 3 months. So in other words, if you're collecting $20,000 a month typically, and you're currently collecting 10, it would be $10,000 times 3 months, or a $30,000 loan that would be repaid over 5 years. It's a short time frame to pay it back, but most forbearance agreements are having developers pay back over 1 year. So this is a better way to do it. It's geared towards small landlords. Their portfolio shouldn't be any greater than 200 units, and each building couldn't be any more than 50 units. Developers have to agree during the 90-day period that there would be no evictions based on COVID. That's the gist of it, Joe. Happy to continue. There's a lot of detail here and a lot of players involved. But that's the gist of the program.
Okay. Well, thanks. So let's switch over to Madeline. And Madeline, again, you're patiently waiting for us to let you chime in. The PLP is a fantastic resource available through the state, working again in conjunction with CPC. And although this program is designed for small buildings, this initiative, it has big impact. So if you could just tell us a little bit about the program, how it works, and then obviously, you're involved, HCR is involved with New York Forward Loan as well. So any other comments on that you could share? Thanks. Oh, you're on mute.
Okay, sorry. Sure. So the Small Buildings Participation Loan Program, the PLP for short, is designed to serve as gap financing for primarily for rehab projects between 5 and 40 units, where the sort of market doesn't quite align with sort of the cost of doing rehabs. So in the Hudson Valley, we've seen a lot of projects, again with Eric Baxter, who's was presenting earlier, and others in the Hudson Valley who are doing either adaptive reuse projects. So we have adaptive reuse projects in Newburgh and Poughkeepsie, as well as rental rehab. There's a rental rehab going on in Yonkers presently, and we have several others in the pipeline. And the goal is really so for these urban revitalization projects that need a little bit of an infusion of dollars. It's a ultra low interest only 30-year financing tool that's designed to work with CPC's long-term construction and permanent financing. And it will serve up to $50,000 a unit. And the affordability is designed to average 80% of the area median income, with any individual unit being able to go as high as 120% of AMI. So it's designed to serve a bit of a mix and to sort of help get some of these projects that are sort of in downtown areas, in places that are in need of investment, are starting to see more investment, and to really help them get where they want to go. And we've seen there's been a lot of interest. The Hudson Valley, I think, by far has had the most projects across the state. And it's a really good tool. And we're thinking, as things have been relatively strong in the area, we're hoping that there'll be more projects coming, and we're planning to continue. I think I'm trying to think of what else. Again, it's a 30-year program, so it's a long-term. It's a loan, but it's a long-term financing tool that's designed to bring down, average monthly debt service.
Sure. And for both programs, where would one start? Tom, with the New York Forward program, and Madeline for the PLP.
So in the New York Forward, all of CPC's offices will be accepting applications, and we'll also be working with CDFIs around the state, locally in the Hudson Valley, to be community capital, which will be reaching out to various borrowers to access it. But all applications have to go through the Connect to Capital. That's connect the number to capital.com. All applications have to go through that. And there's a series of questions that are asked that will help guide one through the website, and then that request gets forwarded off to the proper either CDFI or business loan or landlord program and what have you. And that's the way it gets tracked. So connect to capital.com.
And the PLP side of things, in general, for projects that, are going to work with CPC for the senior construction and permanent loans, they can start right with CPC. If there's any other preliminary questions or whatever, I also field questions, but the underwriting generally starts with CPC, since they do take on the lion's share of the underwriting and the process, and they will service the loan and all of that. So
Can I just add to that, Madeline? I think that's one of the beauties of the program, Joe, and the PLP, is that it's not part of the unified funding round. It's an open application period. It's really designed primarily for smaller developers that probably have never applied for any kind of subsidy before. So they can apply to CPC. We can work with them, help them get through the process, working with Madeline at HCR, HFA, to access these funds. And then the state deposits their funds with us, and we lend it out as a seamless construction loan. So for people that have never really worked with a lot of affordable housing before, it's a great opportunity to access some really good subsidized funding. I see Eric shaking his head because Eric has been down this road as well.
Kind of going off of what both Madeline and Tom is saying, we just closed our third project with PLP, and I know not many in the state have even closed, but all three of the projects would not be possible without the PLP program. So HCR and the state have done an amazing job laying out this program, and even working with CPC. It's CPC and everyone that works with CPC, it's really been seamless. Just work directly with CPC. They explain the program. The first one took a little longer to close, but and that was the first one through the state. But after a while, we really got the hang of it, and it's been great.
And Eric, the deals that you've been working on have been in fairly tough neighborhoods. Areas that need some revitalization for sure. Have you seen any other impact based on what you're working on in those neighborhoods?
We're hopefully turning our first one in Newburgh over late August, early September. So hopefully we'll see the impact from there. The other two projects we just closed late last month.
Okay.
So we'll see how that starts to impact. The Hudson Valley is an interesting place in general. It's the brand is great of the Hudson Valley, but I don't think people really understand how hard it is to develop here. Once you add in the taxes on the operational cost, with how expensive construction actually is, it's really hard to make these deals work, especially in the inner cities.
Sure. So Eric, staying on that for a minute, because you bring up an amazing point. To the south of the mid Hudson, down in communities in lower Westchester, specifically New Rochelle, they put this system in place where there's, as they like to say, there's a certain level of certainty. A developer walks in, they know exactly what they're going to get, how long it's going to take, and then they move with their project. So, in that vein, what are some of their stumbling blocks, and what would you like to say for municipalities to implement and change the process?
Taxes are a stumbling block. Unfortunately enough, some of the local IDAs are really getting a little more sophisticated on what projects need help, and multifamily is important for our communities. They provide new housing, and they need help, especially in the city of Poughkeepsie, Newburgh, to make feasible. To make sure that they're teaching the IDA boards the projects that need help is very important. Without tax relief on, they're still getting more taxes than they would if the development didn't happen. So really understanding that model and, making sure that information is passed down to those IDA boards is very important.
Sure. And go ahead. I'm sorry.
Tying into that, I think one thing also people have to understand is it's almost the same for me to build new construction in Poughkeepsie as it is in Westchester. Labor is relatively the same. Construction materials are the same price. It's not any more expensive to buy sheetrock in New Rochelle. So people have to really understand that they're getting almost twice as much rents as we are in the city of Poughkeepsie. So it's land's more expensive, but there's more room to move in New Rochelle than it is in Poughkeepsie.
Sure, and the connection that you brought back to IDA, it's absolute. I like to say that economic development and housing are intrinsically linked. You can't have one without the other. As you want to develop more jobs, better paying jobs, they need a place to live. And so do all of the essential workers who may not be in a high paying job. They need good quality, affordable housing. And you as a developer knows exactly what to create.
Yeah. Agree. And I think, the old economic development was always just jobs, let's attract jobs. But, now we're starting to get into a mode of how we live, where we live, Empire State Development had the live, work, play model. And, people aren't going to move here or want to create jobs up here if there's no affordable housing or great housing stock. I think, through the 90s and early 2000s, there wasn't a lot of new construction of apartments up here. And I think we're kind of seeing the effect. I mean, everyone can tell you there's a housing shortage in the Hudson Valley, and we need to develop a lot more housing to fill that need.
For sure. And Greg, you touched on that when you're talking about the pent up demand and low inventory. From the perspective of single family homes and now the renters, you're seeing long waiting lists on a lot of the properties.
Well, one of the things that we have to remember is the Hudson Valley really has a lot of economic development going on, and some of it's using, IDA funds or that. And these are employing people to build them, and then they're employing people to work in Amy's Kitchen or Medline or Amazon. Just those are three of the real giant ones. But these people still need a place to live, and they need decent housing, not just other housing. And we have a real shortage of new housing, and I keep talking about it, and hopefully someday some of that'll change.
Yeah, right. Yeah. You'd be surprised by how quickly these apartment buildings, the new construction, fill up.
Right. Yeah. Speaking of Eric, so what kind of a lease-up strategy do you put into place? I mean, how quickly does a 50-unit building fill?
We did a 40-unit in the city of Poughkeepsie, and that was totally fill in 2 months, with barely any pre-leasing. We're doing a little higher end complex in LaGrange, and the barn complex, it's one of the buildings that we're finishing that has 23 units. We're just going to get the COs next week, and it's already fully leased.
And so, Eric, I know you touched on it a little bit. So those properties in particular, where are the renters coming from? Are they local, or are they from outside the area?
You know, interesting, a lot were local. And then once the pandemic hit, we started getting a lot more calls from New York City. So you have seen a little bit of shift, which, you know, it's going to drive up the price eventually of these units.
Sure. Thank you. Tom, Madeline, any other closing remarks or anything to add as we wrap up?
No, it's for me, it's great to see New York State opening up again, construction beginning again. You know, I think that gives us a lot of confidence in moving forward. We're very anxious to continue to fund construction loans and help rebuild the various cities that we do work in. So we're very optimistic going forward as things open up again.
Terrific. And Madeline, anything from the state?
No, I don't think so. I think, you know, the program has gotten off to a great start, and we're looking forward to continuing it. And I think a lot of communities in the Hudson Valley will really benefit. So, you know, again, we're also looking forward to things starting up again and getting to work and keeping at what we're already doing.
Terrific. All right. Well, I'd like to thank you all once again for participating in our housing webinar. And in closing, you know, I'd also like to thank the members of Pattern and our investors in the Center for Housing Solutions, which do include CPC and Baxter Built, Rand Realty, the Carney Group, Rupco, and Hudson River Housing, all incredible developers here in the Hudson Valley. And you know, a last pitch to like us on social media platforms, and I invite you to go to the website and take a look at some of our other webinars. And our latest reports, our blogs, our newsletters. We got a lot of really good information for the whole Hudson Valley. So thank you once again. And let's make sure that phase 2 moves quickly and painlessly so we can get into 3 and 4 and get everything open right back up. So thank you all again.
Be part of the solution. Join. Become a member. Subscribe. Join our mailing list to stay in the know. Attend our events and virtual panel discussions. Sponsor. Become an event sponsor to support our programming. Participate. Get involved in a Pattern initiative like Fellows and Lift HV. Invest. Support Pattern initiatives you're passionate about through an annual investment. Donate. Make a charitable contribution to support Pattern's work. Connect with us.